She laughed, told her friends I'd never introduce him to my parents. Everyone laughed with her. I didn't. I just finished my drink, left, and let her find out what it feels like when someone finally means it. I remember the night like it was a memory playing on a cracked film reel, the kind where the edges blur and the center burns bright. The air was thick with the tang of rain and city smoke, the neon signs flickering like tired eyes above the crowded streets. I had walked past the diner twice before, realizing I was exactly where I didn't want to be, but couldn't avoid. I could feel it in the small hairs at the back of my neck, the way my hands itched in my pockets, trying to find something solid to grip in a world that had already started slipping. Quick! Hit like, share with your friends, and subscribe. This story is about to get intense. The bar was dimly lit, the kind of place that felt alive even when it was empty. Red bulbs hummed above the counter, casting a soft glow that made every surface feel sticky and intimate at the same time. I slid in, unremarked by the few patrons nursing their drinks, as though the liquid might somehow soak away their lives. The smell of whiskey and damp leather hit me before I even made it to the counter. I ordered a single drink, neat, because I needed the clarity more than the comfort, though both were slipping away with each exhale. Then she appeared. She wasn't what I expected, never the type to stand out in a crowd unless she wanted to. That night, though, she had a presence that demanded attention without trying. She laughed at something small, something trivial that didn't need laughter, and the room leaned into it as if gravity itself had shifted. She had her friends around her, a circle of easy camaraderie, the kind of effortless bond that made you wonder if you'd ever belong anywhere at all. I'd never introduce him to my parents, she said, tossing her head back, letting the words roll over her friends like a wave. Everyone laughed, warm, knowing, protective laughter, but something in her eyes flickered, almost imperceptibly, and I noticed. It wasn't amusement, it was a declaration, a casual cruelty wrapped in humor. I didn't laugh. I just finished my drink, the amber liquid warming my chest and settling in my stomach like a promise I couldn't yet understand. I left. Outside, the rain had picked up. It fell in a steady, heavy rhythm, drumming against the neon signs, puddles forming in the uneven asphalt. I walked without a destination, letting the cold water soak through my coat. My thoughts were sharp, fractured. That laugh, that casual cruelty, it hadn't been meant for me, not directly. But somehow I had felt it. Felt the echo of it reverberate through me, and for the first time I understood exactly what it meant when someone finally meant it. Days passed, and I couldn't shake her laughter. It haunted the edges of my mind, the way a melody lingers after the song has ended. I found myself retracing that night, every detail, every flicker of light, every shadow that had moved too quickly across her face. There was something beneath it all, a current she didn't realize was there, that I couldn't ignore. I started seeing her in places I didn't expect. The corner cafe with the cracked tiles, the park bench under the flickering street lamp, the old record store with its musty vinyl smell, always distant, always with that same circle of friends, always laughing. And every time, I stayed hidden, watching. Not out of obsession, not entirely, but because I needed to understand the truth behind the performance. She was beautiful in a way that demanded attention. Yes, but more than that, she was sharp. Her words carried the subtle edge of someone used to being the center, someone who knew the power of their own voice. I noticed how people leaned in when she spoke, how even the most confident among them softened. That night in the bar had been a glimpse, a hint of the magnetism she carried everywhere. I remember the first time I approached her. It was in that same cafe, the one with the cracked tiles, where the rain had left the streets glistening like polished glass. She was alone, scrolling through her phone, a faint smile tugging at her lips at some private joke. I hesitated outside the door, the bell above jingling as I stepped in. Her head lifted, eyes narrowing slightly, as if she recognized the storm I carried with me. "Do I know you?" she asked, voice light but cautious. "Not yet," I said. And that was the truth. We talked for a while, the conversation tentative, careful, as though both of us were testing the waters. I watched her gestures, the subtle ways her eyes darted when she was thinking, the curl of her fingers around the mug, as if she could squeeze secrets out of it. She laughed sometimes, lightly, a sound that made the cafe feel smaller, warmer. And I realized that the laugh, the same one that had cut through me in the bar, wasn't just a weapon. It was also armor. Weeks passed, and the encounters became intentional, though she never admitted it. I followed her routines, not out of obsession, but because the world she inhabited fascinated me. She was a storm contained in human form, unpredictable, sometimes cruel, sometimes dazzling. I learned her patterns, the rhythm of her days, the subtle language she used with friends that told me she noticed more than she let on. One evening, she invited me to a rooftop gathering. The city sprawled beneath us like a constellation of chaos, lights blinking and pulsing in rhythm with the music. She moved through her friends with effortless grace, and when she finally approached me, there was a spark in her eye I hadn't seen before. "You follow me," she said. A statement, not a question. "Maybe," I said, letting the word hang between us like smoke. We drank under the stars, the city alive around us, a living backdrop to the tension building quietly between our words. And then she laughed, softly this time, almost conspiratorial, and said, "You know, I could hurt you if I wanted." I looked at her, really looked, and I nodded. "I know." There was a pause, a charged silence where the night seemed to hold its breath. I wanted to tell her then, in that moment, that I understood her in a way no one else did, that I could endure what others fled from. But the words didn't come. Instead, I watched her tilt her head toward the city, and in that simple motion I saw the sharp edge of loneliness she hid beneath her laughter. It was then I realized that the laughter, the cruelty, the detachment, it wasn't just performance, it was defense. And perhaps, if I could endure it, if I could navigate the maze she had built around herself, I could reach the truth. The night ended abruptly. She left with a friend, disappearing into the neon-lit streets, leaving me alone on the rooftop with the city humming below. I stayed there for hours, feeling the pulse of the city, the quiet certainty that I had just crossed some invisible line. Something had shifted, though I didn't yet know what. I began to notice patterns, subtle cues she left in the world, almost like breadcrumbs. A discarded scarf on a bench, a book left open in the cafe, a message half written and never sent. And I followed them, not recklessly, but deliberately, because I needed to understand what drove someone who could laugh so easily at the pain she inflicted on others. Weeks turned into months. Our interactions became a silent dance, a tension-filled game where neither of us fully revealed our hand. I saw her with others, heard the way she talked about them behind closed doors, felt the electric sting of exclusion she wielded like a weapon. And yet, in the midst of it all, there were fleeting moments of vulnerability, glimpses of a person I couldn't let go of even if I wanted to. Then came the night that changed everything. It was raining again, a relentless downpour that made the streets shimmer and the city smell of wet asphalt and possibility. She had texted me, a single line that made my heart race. "Come." No explanation, no context, just come. I arrived at the address, an old warehouse by the river, the kind of place that smelled of rust and forgotten memories. Inside it was dark, the air heavy with the scent of metal and rain leaking through the roof. And there she was, standing alone in the center of the vast, echoing space, her silhouette framed by a single shaft of light from a broken window. "You came," she said, not a question, just a statement. "I did," I replied. She laughed then, softly, almost shyly, and it struck me harder than any of her casual cruelty. She walked toward me, each step deliberate, measured, and for a moment the world shrank to just the two of us in that cavernous warehouse. "You've been following me," she said, not accusing, just acknowledging. "I've been watching," I said, trying to understand. Her smile faded slightly, replaced by something sharper, more guarded. "And what have you learned?" "That you're human," I said simply, "even if you don't want anyone to see it." She looked at me then, really looked, and I saw a flicker of something like fear, or was it recognition, pass across her face. She stepped back, the distance between us charged, dangerous, magnetic. "I think you should leave," she said. But I didn't. I stayed. The warehouse seemed to breathe around us, the shadows stretching and twisting as the rain hammered the roof. I could hear the river beyond the walls, the water rushing with a kind of urgent insistence, and it somehow mirrored the pulse in my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to retreat, to turn around and disappear into the night, but I didn't. There was something about her that demanded confrontation, something in her eyes that dared me to understand what she really was beneath the carefully constructed mask. You don't leave when someone tells you to, she said, her voice low now, almost a whisper. The words were deliberate, dangerous, and they carried with them a weight I couldn't ignore. I stay, I replied. The simplicity of the answer seemed to unnerve her, though she didn't show it immediately. Instead, she tilted her head, watching me, as though trying to decipher a puzzle she hadn't expected to face. You think you know me, she said, stepping closer, the light catching her face in sharp relief. Shadows carved along her cheekbones, turning her features into something both beautiful and intimidating. But you don't. You've seen me laugh, seen me charm, seen me hurt people without thinking twice. But that's the surface. You don't know the bottom. You can't imagine what it really is. Her words were a challenge, and I felt it like a spark racing down my spine. I took a slow step toward her, careful, measured, not because I was afraid, but because I understood the game she wanted to play. I don't need to imagine, I said. I know enough to stay. I know enough to see what everyone else misses. She paused. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire, ready to snap. For the first time, I saw something like uncertainty flicker across her eyes, a crack in the armor she wore so effortlessly. And in that crack, I saw the first real glimpse of vulnerability, something raw and unpolished that made my chest tighten. Why? She asked finally, her voice softer now, almost curious. Why do you care? The question hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. I wanted to tell her that I cared because I couldn't stop seeing her, because her laughter had burned itself into my memory, because I could sense the loneliness she tried so desperately to hide. But I didn't. Instead, I just said, because someone has to. Her laugh came then, softer, quieter, but still dangerous. Someone has to? That's what you tell yourself, isn't it? That you're the hero of this little story you've written in your head. Maybe, I said, but heroes don't walk away when things get messy. For a moment she stared at me, the storm in her eyes mirrored by the rain outside, and then, almost imperceptibly, she smiled. Not the cruel, polished smile I had seen before, but a real one, fleeting, fragile. Messy, she whispered, as if the word itself was a confession. I reached out, slowly, hesitantly, and she didn't flinch. Our hands brushed, and for a moment the world shrank to just the two of us, the warehouse and the storm outside, and then she stepped back. You think this changes anything, she said, shaking her head. It doesn't. You don't know the rules. You don't know what you're stepping into. I know enough to stay, I said again. Her laughter came then, low and dark, almost a growl. You have no idea. And she was right. The days that followed were a blur of shadows and half-secrets. She didn't call me, didn't reach out, but I felt her everywhere, her presence lingering in the spaces she had occupied, in the coffee shop, the park, the bookstore. Every encounter was a careful dance, every conversation a layered game of truth and omission. I could see her testing me, probing the edges of my patience, my curiosity, my understanding. And I matched her, step for step, because I had made a silent vow to myself that I would not turn away. One evening, she appeared at my apartment. I hadn't expected her. I wasn't sure if I wanted her. But there she was, standing in the doorway, drenched from the rain, eyes sharp, alive, dangerous. You follow me, she said, again not accusing, just stating fact. I do, I admitted. You're obsessed, she said, stepping inside without waiting for permission, shaking the water from her coat, the air filled with the smell of wet leather and city rain. Maybe, I said, letting the word hang between us like smoke. She studied me, eyes narrowing, lips pressed together. Maybe? She asked, her tone mocking. That's not a maybe. That's a truth you're too afraid to admit. I'm not afraid, I said. You are, she countered. You're terrified. Terrified of what it means to care about someone like me. Someone who will cut you open without thinking twice. Her words hit me like a punch. Not because they were untrue, but because they were exactly true. I swallowed, and the room felt smaller, more intimate, the tension thick enough to taste. Maybe I am, I admitted, but I don't care. The admission changed the air between us. Her eyes softened, just slightly, and I saw the faintest flicker of respect, or was it curiosity, pass through them. She stepped closer, the space between us charged. Dangerous, magnetic. You think you can handle it, she said softly. You think you can survive what I am. I know I can, I said, and for a moment there was silence. The storm outside slowed, the rain tapering off to a steady drizzle. The city hummed beneath the windows, oblivious to the tension contained in this small apartment. Then she did something I didn't expect. She smiled, a real, soft smile, and for the first time I felt as though the walls she had built around herself were not impenetrable. "I want to test you," she said. "Not in the way you think, not in the ways everyone else tests me. I want to see if you can handle the truth." "Then tell me," I said, heart racing, pulse sharp. And she did. She told me about the past she kept buried, the events that shaped the sharp edges I had seen, about the betrayals, the manipulations, the people who had used her as a pawn in their own games, about the loneliness that had grown in the spaces between friendships, between family, between lovers who had promised everything and delivered nothing. And as she spoke, I realized something terrifying. She had weaponized her pain, her defenses, her very existence, into a force that pushed everyone away except those who could endure it. And I understood, with chilling clarity, that I had crossed a line not even she expected anyone to cross. Days turned into weeks. Our interactions became a silent rhythm, a game of anticipation and revelation. She would disappear for days, leaving me with the ghosts of our conversations, the faint traces of her presence, the sense that she was watching even when I couldn't see her. And every time she returned, the intensity between us escalated, the tension sharper, the stakes higher. Then came the night of the first real test. She called me, her voice cold, distant, yet impossibly compelling. "Meet me at the river," she said. No excuses. I arrived to find her standing on the edge of the dock, the water black and restless beneath the dim glow of the street lamps. She didn't turn as I approached, just waited, silent, radiating a kind of dangerous calm that made my stomach tighten. "You've come this far," she said without looking at me, "but this is where it gets hard. Not just for me, for you too. You're not just observing anymore. You're in it, fully." I stepped closer. "I'm ready." She finally turned, her eyes scanning mine, searching, testing. "Are you sure?" "I am," I said. And then she smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that didn't carry cruelty this time, just an unspoken promise of everything to come. "You'll see," she said softly. "Everything you thought you knew about me, about us, about the rules, none of it matters anymore." The water lapped against the dock as the city hummed in the distance. I felt the tension coil in my chest like a spring ready to snap. Whatever she had planned, I knew there was no turning back. That night, the first twist revealed itself, not through words, but through action. She stepped forward, suddenly, deliberately, and pushed me, not violently, but enough to make me stumble. My hands shot out, catching the edge of the dock, and I realized she wasn't testing me physically. She was testing my reaction, my instinct, my ability to remain steady when the ground beneath me shifted unexpectedly. I looked at her, chest heaving, heart pounding, and she just smiled. "You see," she said, "it's never what you expect, and if you survive, if you endure, then maybe, just maybe, you understand." And in that moment, I knew I had crossed another line. She had drawn me into her world, fully, and there was no going back. The dock was slick beneath my shoes, rainwater running in thin rivers over the wood, carrying with it the smell of mud and decay from the river below. Her figure was a silhouette in the dim light, small but impossibly commanding. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and loud, echoing in my ears over the soft slap of the water against the pilings. And yet I felt no fear, only anticipation, sharp and electric, like stepping onto the edge of a precipice and realizing the fall might be the only way forward. "You're still standing," she said, her voice soft, almost a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "Most people fall at this point, not just literally, metaphorically, emotionally, mentally. Most people crumble before they even realize the game has started." I studied her, trying to read her expression, but she was a master of masks. Every flicker of emotion was calculated, every gesture deliberate. But this time, something was different. The faintest tremor in her hands betrayed her, a ripple beneath the surface of her control. And I knew then, as clearly as I've ever known anything, that she was testing me not for sport, not for curiosity, but because she had no other choice. She couldn't afford to trust anyone, but somehow she had chosen to test me. "What are you waiting for?" I asked. Her eyes flickered toward the river, dark and restless, then back to mine. "I need to see if you're willing to let go," she said. "Not the easy stuff, not the superficial. I need to see if you'll let go of everything you think you know about me, about yourself, about us." The words settled over me like a fog, thick and disorienting. I could feel the tension coiling in my chest, ready to snap. "And if I do?" I asked. "Then maybe we can see who we really are," she said. Her confession was almost imperceptible, but it changed the air around us. For the first time, she wasn't entirely in control. There was a vulnerability there, sharp and dangerous, and it called to something inside me I couldn't ignore. She took a step closer, close enough that I could feel the faint heat radiating from her body. "Do you trust me?" she asked. The question hit me like a blow. I had followed her, watched her, endured her tests. I had accepted the cruel elegance of her laughter, the sharp edges of her words, the labyrinth of her games. And yet, I had no idea what trusting her would mean. But in that instant, I realized it didn't matter. I had already crossed the line. The choice had been made the moment I decided to stay. "I do," I said. Her eyes softened just slightly, and I saw it, a flicker of relief, or maybe surprise, I couldn't tell. And then she turned abruptly, walking to the edge of the dock. The river stretched black and endless beneath her, the city lights reflected in its restless surface. She glanced back at me over her shoulder. "Then follow me. Step into the unknown." The words hung in the air, a challenge and a promise. I stepped forward, letting the slick wood slide beneath my feet. Each step was deliberate, measured, as if the river itself demanded reverence. And then she turned fully, facing me, the shadows cutting across her face like fractured glass. "You have no idea what you're about to see," she said. "I want to," I said. And that was when she stepped aside, and I saw it. A small hatch in the dock, hidden beneath layers of rotting wood, opened to reveal a narrow staircase descending into darkness. A sharp, chemical smell drifted upward, mixed with the river's brackish odor. I hesitated only for a heartbeat. Then she reached out her hand. "Come," she said, "or stay above and pretend none of this exists. It's your choice." I took her hand. The instant our fingers touched, a current ran through me, sharp and electric, as if acknowledging the irrevocable step I had taken. The stairs descended into a chamber I couldn't have imagined. The walls were damp, stone and brick slick with moisture. Faint light glowed from torches mounted in iron sconces, casting flickering shadows that made the space feel alive, like the stone itself was breathing. And in the center of the chamber was a table, old and scarred, with objects arranged on it in precise, deliberate patterns. Photographs, letters, trinkets, and small, almost meaningless items that somehow carried weight I couldn't yet understand. "This," she said, her voice echoing softly, "is where the truth begins." I moved closer, studying the items, and realized they were fragments of her life, pieces of a puzzle she had lived but never shared. Photographs of people I didn't recognize, faces smiling and twisted in ways that hinted at secrets. Letters written in a delicate hand, some torn, some burned at the edges. Every object carried a weight, a story, a betrayal I hadn't yet pieced together. "You've never shown this to anyone," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "No," she admitted, "and most people would never see it. They wouldn't survive it." I looked at her, studying the mixture of defiance and vulnerability in her eyes. "Why me?" "Because," she said, stepping closer, "I think you might be the only one who can." And then she did something I didn't expect. She handed me a photograph. It was a picture of her as a child, standing in a field, face bruised, eyes wide and haunted. The innocence was gone, replaced by something far darker, something I couldn't name. My chest tightened, the weight of it pressing down, and I realized that every cruel laugh, every sharp word, every carefully calculated move had its roots here, in this moment, captured on film. "You see now," she said softly. "You see why I am the way I am. You see why the laughter isn't just a joke. It's a shield, a weapon, a lifeline." I swallowed hard, the reality of it settling over me like a storm. I had thought I understood her. I had thought I had seen the truth. But this was something else entirely. And then she revealed the twist that shattered the fragile equilibrium I had been clinging to. "There's someone else," she said, her voice steady but quiet, almost mournful. "Someone you don't know, someone who's been here all along, shaping things, controlling things, watching, waiting, and if you aren't careful, they'll ruin everything, including you." I froze. "Who?" I demanded, my voice sharp, slicing through the chamber's heavy air. Her eyes darkened. "You'll find out soon enough. But the point isn't who. It's what. What you do when you realize you've been a pawn in a game far bigger than you imagined." The words hit me like a cold wave. The tension in the room coiled around my ribs, a physical thing I could feel pressing inward. I realized then that everything I had believed about her, about us, about myself, was now in question. The game had shifted, and the rules were no longer clear. I wanted to ask questions, to demand answers, to push for clarity, but she shook her head. "Not yet," she said. "You need to experience it, see it unfold, and only then will you understand. Only then will you survive." The chamber fell silent, the flickering torchlight casting long shadows that seemed to reach for me. I felt the weight of the moment, the impossibility of retreat. I had crossed lines I couldn't uncross, stepped into a world I couldn't leave, and now faced a truth more dangerous than I had imagined. She turned away, walking toward a narrow passage at the far end of the chamber. "Follow," she said over her shoulder, "or stay behind and let the world continue to unfold without you. Your choice." I followed. Every step echoed, each footfall a reminder that there was no turning back. The passage twisted, narrow and suffocating, the air thick with the scent of damp stone and old secrets. And then it opened into a larger room, vast and dimly lit, filled with the hum of hidden machinery and the faint click of mechanisms moving in perfect synchronization. "You see this?" she asked, gesturing to the room. "This is the world I've built. The life I've constructed to survive, the web that no one else can navigate. And now you're in it." I looked around, heart pounding, trying to comprehend the sheer scale of what she had revealed. Every object, every device, every shadow in the room hinted at something meticulous, something deliberate, something terrifying. "And the person I mentioned?" I asked, my voice trembling despite myself. Her eyes met mine, sharp and unreadable. "They're closer than you think, watching, waiting, and they won't stop until they've claimed everything I've built, including you." I swallowed hard, realizing the game had changed completely. The stakes were higher than I had ever imagined, the rules rewritten in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. And in that moment, I understood. The truth I had been chasing was only the beginning. The room was impossibly vast, filled with shadows that seemed to move on their own, edges curling as if alive. The faint hum of hidden machinery echoed against the stone walls, creating a rhythm that synced with my heartbeat, sharp and relentless. Every step I took sounded like thunder in the silence, each movement betraying my presence to whatever unseen eyes had been watching all along. She moved ahead of me with a fluid grace, the kind of motion that suggested confidence, danger, and complete control. But I noticed something subtle, a pause in her step, a flicker in her eyes, a hesitation that betrayed the slightest worry. She had led me here, yes, but even she was wary of the consequences. "Do you understand what this is?" she asked, her voice calm, almost hypnotic. "Not just this room, not just these walls, but everything I've built, every move, every calculation, every moment of cruelty and laughter. It's all part of survival. And now, survival includes you." I followed silently, taking in the room piece by piece. Strange contraptions lined the walls, gears spinning silently, some with paper notes attached, covered in meticulous handwriting. Photographs pinned to corkboards were arranged like evidence. Faces of strangers. People I didn't recognize, some smiling, some twisted in anguish. Each one seemed to pulse with a story I wasn't yet allowed to read. "You've seen parts of me," she continued, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "But you haven't seen the whole, and the truth is dangerous." I swallowed, the weight of anticipation pressing down on my chest. "I can handle it," I said, though even as I spoke the words, a flicker of doubt crossed my mind. She stopped abruptly at a doorway on the far side of the room. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper, and the faint hum of machinery seemed to fade into a low, menacing pulse. She turned to face me fully. "Beyond this door," she said, "is where the real game begins, where you see why I am who I am, why no one has ever lasted this long, and why, maybe, just maybe, you might not either." I stepped closer, drawn by a mixture of fear, curiosity, and an inexplicable trust I had placed in her. She hesitated, and then, with a measured movement, pushed open the door. Darkness spilled out, swallowing the light from the previous room. Inside, the air was damp and heavy, carrying the scent of metal and earth. The floor was uneven, stones slick beneath my shoes. The faint sound of dripping water echoed through the cavern, each drop punctuating the tension like a ticking clock. And then I saw it. A figure, standing at the far end of the chamber, shadowed and indistinct. I couldn't make out features, but the presence was unmistakable. Someone deliberately waiting, observing, calculating. "That's them," she whispered, her voice a blend of warning and reverence. "The one I told you about, the one who's been controlling everything from the shadows, and they've been waiting for you too." My heart pounded. "Who are they?" She shook her head, a faint tremor betraying her composure. "It doesn't matter what they are. What matters is what they want, and right now, they want to see you break." The figure stepped forward, finally emerging into the dim torchlight. It was a man, tall, precise, and unyielding. His eyes, sharp and calculating, locked onto mine with a predatory focus that made my stomach twist. I felt the first real sting of fear, not of her, but of him. He was a predator, a force I couldn't anticipate, a player in this game I hadn't known existed. "You've come far," he said, voice calm, cold, unnervingly composed. "But you don't know the rules. None of you do. And by the time you understand, it will be too late." She stepped in front of me, a shield I hadn't expected. "Don't underestimate them," she said. "They've ruined more lives than you can imagine, and now they've set their sights on you." I felt a mix of anger and clarity rising in me. All the manipulation, the games, the tension, it had been orchestrated, not just by her, but by him. And if I was going to survive, I had to understand both of them, the dynamics, the rules, and the stakes. He took another step forward, slow, deliberate, and I noticed something subtle, a faint hesitation in his movements, a sign that even he was testing me, gauging my reaction. "I've watched everything," he said. "Every choice, every move, every step you've taken, and now I decide if you're worthy." I glanced at her, searching for some reassurance. She met my gaze with an intensity I hadn't seen before, a silent acknowledgement that this was the ultimate test. "Remember," she said quietly, "nothing is as it seems. Don't trust appearances, don't trust your instincts, and above all, don't trust me entirely." The words struck me with unexpected force. Everything had been leading to this confrontation, but now the complexity of the game became painfully clear. I couldn't rely on intuition alone. Every decision mattered. Every reaction was being measured. He stepped closer, the torchlight casting long, jagged shadows across his face. "So," he said, voice low, measured, "shall we begin?" And then the first test came. Not physical, not direct, but psychological. A screen flickered to life on the wall behind him, displaying images. Images of people I knew, fragments of conversations I had witnessed, secrets I had never shared. Each image was paired with a message, precise and cutting, designed to provoke, to manipulate, to destabilize. I realized immediately that this was the real game, not a test of strength, but of perception, judgment, and endurance. Each choice I made, each reaction I had, would ripple outward, influencing the next move in ways I couldn't yet predict. She watched me closely, her eyes sharp, unreadable. "They want to break you," she whispered. "They've broken others before. But you might survive, or you might not. That's the difference." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the chamber, the river beyond the walls, the storm outside, and the silent pulse of the city that none of us could hear. Everything I had endured until now, the laughter, the cruelty, the chase, it had all led to this moment. And in that instant, I understood that nothing would ever be simple again. The man stepped closer, voice steady, precise. "Your first move," he said, "will determine everything. Choose wisely." I glanced at her, and she nodded ever so slightly, a flicker of something between encouragement and warning. And in that moment, I realized the truth. The game was far from over. The stakes were higher than I had ever imagined, and the first real test of survival, emotional, psychological, and moral, was about to begin. I braced myself, feeling the pulse of fear and exhilaration running through me, knowing that one misstep could mean the end. But I also felt something else, a determination I hadn't known I possessed, a clarity that even in this labyrinth of manipulation and danger, I had found my own edge. And with that, I took the first step. The chamber seemed to shrink around us, the shadows stretching longer and sharper with every step. The hum of hidden machinery pulsed like a heartbeat, syncing with my own, thrumming with tension that made my chest ache. The man, silent, unyielding, predatory, watched me with an intensity that felt almost unbearable, and she, standing beside me, was at once a shield and a mystery, her calm composure masking a storm. I could barely sense. The images on the screen flickered again, sharp, precise, each one a dagger aimed at memory, perception, trust. Faces of strangers, people I knew, moments I had witnessed, secrets I had never spoken, each one a test designed to break me. I realized with a jolt that the stakes weren't just survival, they were understanding, clarity, truth, and that truth could either liberate or destroy me. I took a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the sweat on my palms, the tension coiling in my chest. I realized that this was no longer a game of following her or even enduring him. This was a game of self. Every reaction, every decision, every flicker of instinct would ripple outward, shaping not just the immediate moment but the trajectory of everything to come. He stepped forward, eyes sharp, voice calm. "Decide," he said. "Reveal the truth, or let it remain hidden. Your choice." I glanced at her, seeking guidance, clarity, even reassurance. Her eyes met mine, steady and unwavering. But then she spoke softly, almost as if to herself. "There is no one to trust completely, only yourself." And in that moment, clarity struck me. This was never about her, never about him. It was about me, my perception, my endurance, my willingness to confront what I had always avoided, the depths of fear, the shadows of truth, the fragility of human connection. I stepped forward, reaching toward the nearest screen. My fingers hovered, hesitant, then pressed a key. The images shifted, revealing the same people and moments, but this time, instead of the cold, manipulative framing, I saw them differently. Vulnerable, flawed, human. The narrative I had assumed, the story of manipulation and cruelty, suddenly fractured into something layered, complex, painful, and beautiful. The man's expression changed imperceptibly, a hint of surprise, or maybe respect. She remained silent, watching, her lips pressed together, her eyes glinting with something unreadable. And I realized the game wasn't about breaking me. It was about seeing whether I could perceive truth beneath performance, motive beneath cruelty, and humanity beneath armor. Then she spoke, finally, her voice low but resonant. "You see now, the laughter, the cruelty, the manipulations, they were all defenses, not just mine, but theirs too. The world is full of people protecting themselves, hiding pain, constructing labyrinths to survive. Most never reveal the depths, most never allow anyone in. You stayed. You watched. You endured. And that matters." The man stepped back, finally speaking directly to me. "You've passed, in a sense, not by obeying, not by following, but by choosing to see. Most would falter, driven by fear or assumption. But you," he paused, the words heavy with gravity, "you might survive this world as it truly is." I exhaled, the weight in my chest lifting just slightly. But relief was tempered with realization. Survival wasn't about conquering anyone. It was about understanding the complexity of people, the motives behind cruelty, the fragile beauty of vulnerability. And in that realization, the story of her, of him, of the labyrinth itself, finally crystallized. She stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her. "I wanted you to understand," she whispered, "not because I trusted you fully, but because I needed to see if anyone could. And now I know. You can." The man's figure receded into the shadows, leaving only her and me in the chamber. The storm outside had passed, the river calm and reflective, like glass. And in that stillness, I finally understood the truth she had been trying to reveal all along. The labyrinth, the cruelty, the laughter, the games, they were all defenses against a world that could be cold, unforgiving, and merciless. But for those who could endure, who could observe, who could perceive beyond performance, the world held moments of beauty, clarity, and connection that made the struggle worth it. We left the chamber together, stepping into the soft light of the early morning, the city stretching around us like a promise of possibility. Silence settled between us, not awkward or tense, but weighted with understanding. And I realized that our story, our test, wasn't over. It would continue in subtle, quiet ways, but now I had the knowledge, the perspective, the endurance to navigate it. As we parted ways, her hand brushed mine, a fleeting, deliberate touch. No words were exchanged, none were needed. Everything had been said in silence, in endurance, in survival. And as I walked away, I felt the echoes of the laughter, the cruelty, the tests, not as pain, but as lessons. I think about that night often, about the way the shadows bend, the way people hide their truths, the labyrinths we all construct to survive. And I realize now that survival isn't about avoiding cruelty or danger. It's about seeing beyond it, about understanding, about choosing when to stay, when to act, and when to finally let go. So I leave you with this. not as answers, but as questions. What would you do if you encountered someone who wielded their defenses like weapons? Could you endure their cruelty to see the truth beneath? How far would you go to understand another person, even when the stakes are high and the rules are unclear? And finally, what labyrinths have you constructed in your own life? And who might be watching, waiting, testing you in ways you don't yet realize? Because sometimes the greatest revelations aren't about the people around us, they're about what we discover about ourselves when the shadows finally clear.